The music videos for Stray Kids' solo tracks dropped in December, and I think each video is a showcase of each member's unique style, artistic vision, and creativity in storytelling. I also think it's interesting where each member and the production teams got their inspirations from, because there are so many references from classical art, movies, animation, comics, and other media that I think videos have alluded to and drawn inspiration from in order to tell a story. Today, I will be breaking down my interpretation of what the story behind Ian's solo can be, using elements found in the music video and the song's lyrics. Hi, I'm ChattyCalico. Let's chat about Ian's Hallucination music video, shall we? In the Hop intro mini-doc, Ian talked a little bit about his creative process for Hallucination's video. He says it's a song that expresses him trapped in hallucinations, and that he was able to shoot the music video in the direction he wanted. He goes on to talk about the story a bit more in the Making Film Behind the Scenes documentary.
이 뮤직비디오에서 꿈에서 이제 상대방을 만났는데 그걸 이제 조각하려는데 그 조각을 못해서 굉장히 괴로움에 있는 그런 컨셉인데 저의 새로운 모습을 볼 수 있는 그런 분위기의 뮤직비디오인 것 같습니다.
Ian has revealed the story in the behind-the-scenes docs, and while the story is directly reflected in the video, I think there's another layer to the story that is enhanced by the set design, shot choices, and the lyrics. I wanted to see if my thinking aligned with the director's or artist's concept, and I tried to find concept notes from the director, Yomu Jin, or the designers and artists in the creative team, but so far they have not posted notes on their socials. Mostly they posted set pics and video stills. Therefore, my thinking will remain a subjective interpretation. In my interpretation, the music video follows elements from the classical Latin narrative poem by Ovid, Pygmalion and Galatea. The story of Pygmalion and Galatea has been referenced multiple times throughout the pop culture landscape. There's V's Winter Ahead music video, and recently the Christmas rom-com Hot Frosty uses elements of the Pygmalion and Galatea story as the main trope. But what is the Pygmalion and Galatea story? There are many versions of this story, but for the consistency of this piece, I'll be referring to the version written in Ovid's Metamorphoses. As paraphrased in Britannica, the online edition, Metamorphoses centers on stories about change and transformation, whether it's from the state of being alive or not, or object to human. This story is the latter. For this paraphrasing of the story in Book 10 of Metamorphoses, I'm sourcing Mythology by Edith Hamilton, the 2017 anniversary edition released by Hachette. Pygmalion was a sculptor from Cyprus. He saw the Propoetides, or women of the island of Cyprus, who were cursed by Venus, the goddess of love and beauty. In short, they refused to worship Venus properly, so Venus punished them. SparkNote's translation further adds the context that Venus punishes the Propoetides by turning them to stone. After witnessing that catastrophe, Pygmalion determines that, quote, he was not interested in women, unquote. He instead devotes himself to his art and sculpting his version of the ideal woman. He becomes obsessed with this statue he made. He's in love, he brings the statue fine robes, pretty gifts, holds and kisses the statue like a lover would. He is down bad. So much so that he goes to Venus's temple to pray that he finds a woman like this statue. Venus sees this and knows exactly what Pygmalion actually wants. So, Venus grants Pygmalion's wish. When Pygmalion returns home, he kisses the statue and finds that the lips are warm and soft. The stone turned to flesh. Statue is a flesh and blood woman, later named Galatea in some translations. Again, this paraphrasing and translations are from Mythology by Edith Hamilton, Classical Mythology by Mark Morford, Robert J. Leonardon, and Michael Sham, and SparkNotes. I would recommend reading the text for yourself as well to understand the layers within the stories in Ovid's collection. So what does this have to do with hallucination, you ask? The first shot of Hallucination presents us with an artist's studio, specifically a sculptor's studio. If you take a look at the big slab of stone smack dab in the middle of the screen and the ladders and stools needed to reach and carve a stone slab of that height, the finished stone sculptures, and some magnifying tools nearby. This beginning shot could tell any kind of story about a sculptor, but I wanted to bring you to the end of the video. This is a big part of why I brought the mythos into this. If we take a closer look at the slab of stone, cracks are starting to appear on their own. Ayan, who I'll call the sculptor to separate Seungmin the singer from this character in the video, the sculptor hasn't touched the stone at all in these beginning and ending shots. Throughout the music video, the sculptor is not shown to have touched or carved out this slab of stone at all. What we do see repeatedly is the sculptor lying down on the studio floor with broken pieces of sculpture around him, seemingly in deep thought and in distress. Therefore, the stone cracking by itself, even if the artist or the sculptor has not worked on it yet, implies that there could be a greater force that's making the stone crack, or that there is something or someone alive breaking out of the stone. The idea of a living being in the stone thus made me recall the classic story of Pygmalion and Galatea, the story where a stone sculpture of a woman comes to life. The other detail that reminded me of Pygmalion and Galatea is that the sculptor is chasing after something or someone. This someone isn't revealed. Their face isn't shown either, but we can see the sculptor with a pencil, shots of sketches in the tub, and shots of sculptures broken and without faces. The sculptor is not sculpting anything. He isn't planning or sketching, which could mean that the subject of the sculpture's thoughts and hallucinations is elusive. The sculptor is obsessing over the subject of his hallucinations in parallel to how Pygmalion obsessed over the idea of the ideal woman in finding a human, flesh and blood form of the woman he envisioned. In addition, the sculptor is still trying to remember who gave him the inspiration to create. And this aspect, I think, could connect to an aspect of classical Greek literature, the invocation of the Muse. In the modern sense of the word, muses are a source of inspiration, which is fitting for the sculptor's story. In the classical Greek literature and mythos, the muses are, quote, a group of sister goddesses of obscure but ancient origin, and probably were originally the patron goddesses of poets, who in early times were also musicians, providing their own accompaniments. Although later, the Muses' range was extended to include all liberal arts and sciences, unquote, according to Britannica Online Edition. Poets usually invoked the Muses whenever they would start a creative work, specifically as defined by the Oxford Dictionary of Literary Terms, quote, invocation is an appeal made by a poet to a muse or deity for help in composing the poem. The invocation of a muse was a convention or tradition in ancient Greek and Latin poetry, especially in the epic, meaning epic poetry like the Iliad and the Odyssey. Usually, the invocation is placed at the beginning of the poem, but may also appear in later positions, unquote. Take this example from the Iliad by Homer as translated by Emily Wilson in 2023. Goddess, sing of the cataclysmic wrath of great Achilles, son of Peleus. These opening lines set up what this section of the Iliad's Book 1 would be about. The goddess that Homer is referring to is a muse, as he asks her to sing and tell the story of Achilles' wrath, then Homer writes it down. In the essay Plato, Memory and Performance for the Oral Tradition Journal, Classics and Humanities professor Naoko Yamagata makes this exact observation about inspiration and the Iliad. She states, quote, Homer begins his Iliad with the line, quote, sing, goddess, the anger of Peleus' son Achilles, unquote. The line implies that it is the goddess Muse who does the singing, and the poet is merely her mouthpiece, unquote. And like this tradition, I think that Hallucination's lyrics also follow this invocation of the muse. Let's take a look at the translation of the song's opening lines, which I took from Genius's translation, and the lyrics from the Skizhop lyric book. The opening is an invitation to come into the sculptor's space. An invitation is sort of similar to a summoning, I think. An invocation, as defined in the Merriam-Webster Dictionary's online version, is, quote, the act or process of petitioning for help or support, unquote. Here, the sculptor invites the subject to come into his space and make sure that the hallucinations he's having are actually real. Putting this invitation at the opening line of the song and the sculptor pleading with the subject for help, in my interpretation, thus harkens back to how the invocation in most classical Greek poetry was done. If we look further down the verses, the sculptor says he's hallucinating about the muse. This idea of a muse haunting an artist in apparition or causing creative revelations isn't new. In the essay Plato, Memory and Performance, Classics and Humanities professor Naoko Yamagata mentioned that, quote, the idea of poetry as a product of divine inspiration has a long tradition, evident since the oldest poets in Greece, Homer and Hesiod, unquote. Yamagata cites that, quote, in the Theogony, Hesiod describes how he met the Muses on Mount Helicon and received the gift of poetry from them, unquote. Which gives us the idea that poets at the time consider their works as a result of divine inspiration. I think this next verse alludes to this very tradition of divine inspiration and solidifies the subject's identity being that of a muse. Let's take a look. This verse illustrates for us the idea that the subject whispered in the sculptor's ear and left him a vision that haunts him, which is reminiscent of divine inspiration from the muses. The scenario mimics how in classic Greek literature, like the example from the Iliad earlier, invocation for creativity could cause divine inspiration from the muses. So, since the subject is the one causing these inspirational moments for the sculptor, and the sculptor is pleading for the subject to return, pleading for some help from the subject, I conclude that when viewed through the framework of classical Greek poetic tropes, the subject's identity is that of a muse, and Hallucination's practice of putting the plea or invitation at the opening verse recalls the tradition of invoking the muse. To summarize, in my interpretation, Hallucination's video referenced elements from classical literature to tell the story of Ayen's Sculptor character and the subject of the sculptor's hallucinations. The motif of sculptures used throughout the video and the stone slab cracking by itself are reminiscent of the Pygmalion and Galatea story, where a sculptor is the main character and a sculpture turned human is the cause of the sculptor's obsession. Furthermore, the way the song's lyrics open with an invitation and is followed by a plea is quite similar to the way many classical Grecian poets like Homer began their epics, by invoking a muse and pleading or praying for help in completing a work of art. Or in the case of Ayen's Sculptor, pleading for help to determine whether his hallucinations of this subject who gave him the inspiration for his work are real. These aspects of the song's lyrics could point to the subject's identity specifically being a muse. With these aspects combined, I interpreted Hallucination as telling the story of a sculptor who has been stricken by a muse. Perhaps she whispered inspiration in his ear through a dream or a vision or a hallucination, but tragically, he has not seen her face clearly or doesn't remember what she looked like. Like Pygmalion, the sculptor becomes obsessed with trying to recreate the muse, the center of his attention and imagination. The sculptor tries to create artwork as the muse had told him to, but he has a creative block caused by the lost or hazy memory. This causes him despair, perhaps even to break the other sculptures he'd made because nothing else can compare. He keeps chasing this constant figure in his imagination, trying to see if she's real, but there's no resolution for the sculptor or his work. At the very end of it all, the stone cracks by itself, maybe signifying the creation of a new work, a sign that the sculptor's invocation will be granted, or symbolic of a creative breakthrough after a long block. While this interpretation seems straightforward, the possible inspiration from classical literature adds depth to the sculptor's story, gives the set design more thematic purpose that ties into the story, and connects both modern song and video to inspiration from the past. Not gonna lie, I also thought that maybe the video wasn't in sequential order and that the end was at the beginning, that the muse already broke out of the stone and the sculptor is left longing after her, and he can't create art because she's gone. And the potential for another interpretation shows just how intricate and subjective the art of interpretation and analysis is, and shows how the details and artistic direction of the music video were well thought out and incorporated to tell a cohesive story. Overall, I liked the Hallucination music video a lot, and I appreciated the subtle storytelling based on the background elements within the video. It really makes you think and provides rewatch value as you try and figure out what detail you've missed or what detail tells the full story. Of course, there are many ways to interpret the video, and mine links elements from the set design, concept, and lyrics to classical literature I'm familiar with. I hope you liked my analysis for Ayan's Hallucination, and if you did, please leave a like and subscribe. If you have other interpretations, saw details I've missed, or have suggestions for future videos, leave them in the comments below. This has been ChattyCalico. Thanks for watching, and let's chat again soon!